War. We see war portrayed in our media as this great, admirable, and cool thing to be a part of. It's the good guys versus the bad guys. It's heroes versus villains. It's Captain America versus this guy. Wars in TV and movies are fought by 30-year-old buff superstar actors like Arnold Schwarzenegger gunning down a bunch of faceless mercenaries. But that isn't war. Today I want to talk about the Christmas truce of 1914. It was during World War I, and I want to talk about why it's historically significant and inside one of the most horrendous wars there ever was. Have you ever heard of the quote, "War is hell"? It was coined by this man, Union Army General William Sherman. He was actually the main reason the US won the war, and he was talking about trench warfare when he said it. The actual main reason he won the war was because he set fire to the entire South anytime he marched into it. So yeah, war is hell. But what type of war is the most hell? It's trench warfare. The answer is trench warfare, and I'll tell you why. This is a foot, obviously. This is a trench foot. Trench foot is a disease that was so widespread in the trenches of World War I that it was named after it. It occurs when feet are exposed to damp, unsanitary, and cold conditions. It leads to gangrene, severe blisters, the inability to walk, and eventually, if it gets bad enough, amputation of the leg. Also, these are rats, obviously, a mice, you could say even. This is a trench rat. So many men were killed in the trenches of World War I that it was impossible to bury them all. Some would just lay around inside the trenches, and this attracted swarms of rats that would just replicate, and just start eating the food of the soldiers. Harry Patch, a soldier from the war, once wrote, "These rats were huge. They were so big that if a wounded man couldn't defend himself with a weapon, they could probably kill him." 2 or 3 rats would always be found on a dead body. They would go for the eyes first, and then they would use that and burrow into the man's corpse. And what are rats known to carry most? Disease. The trenches were already horrible, but now you have to take into account how easily disease was spread within them. To give you an idea of how rampant disease was in the trenches, during the US's involvement in World War I, more soldiers died to disease than actually in battle. Many of these were also as a result from the Spanish flu, which happened in 1918, towards the end of the war, and killed over 150 million people worldwide. Next, I want to talk about no man's land. No man's land is the split between the two sides. It's the spot where they were fighting for. It was just destroyed, full of barbed wire, and most importantly, full of bodies. It's called no man's land, affectionately, because no man that went up there would ever make it out alive. So yeah, war is hell, and World War I is the very worst example of that. Now with that in mind, what happened during Christmas of 1914? Before Christmas Day came Christmas Eve of 1914. It was cold, dark, and a dreadful night, just like all the other nights in the war. This is a Sainsbury's advert from 2014 celebrating 100 years since the truce happened. The soldiers are huddled up, eating what little rations they had, dreaming of being home with their families during Christmas. It's still probably the worst time of war, I'd say. And seemingly out of nowhere, they just start hearing Christmas carols. Christmas carols from the other side. And then they both start singing Christmas carols for a bit. Listen. Then, the following day, during Christmas morning, a couple brave and I'd say even stupid soldiers decided to pop out from the trenches and see what was going on the other side. This would usually result in a bullet to the head and another body for the rats to feed off of. But this time it didn't. This time both sides came out of their trenches unarmed and agreed on a truce. Hundreds of German and British soldiers laid down their arms for one peaceful day. They shared Christmas together. They played football, they exchanged stories, gifts, and learned about each other. As Ernie Williams of the Cheshire Regiment describes, everybody seemed to be enjoying themselves. There was no sort of ill will between us. There was no referee, no score for the football match, no tally at all. Sadly, just as quickly as the truce began, it ended. Lieutenants on both sides eventually put a stop to the truce, since they didn't want to mess with the soldier's psyche. These were meant to be the people that you can't talk, you can't empathize with. These were meant to be the faceless mercenaries that you were trained to gun down. The war was on again, and there would be no truce until the general armistice in November 1918, the end of the war. Many, probably the majority of the men who celebrated Christmas 1914 together would not live to see the end of the war. But for those who did live and survive, the truce is something that will never be forgotten. Even today, 100 years later. Thank you.